To begin my sculpture, I start out with polymer clay, and I use Super Sculpey. I usually use the beige color just because it's good for everything. It comes in a brick, a 1-pound brick, and a lot of times it's really dry, so I have to add some Sculpey clay softener. It's like an oil, kind of adds the natural oil back into the clay that has evaporated. I have this problem a lot with Super Sculpey unless I buy it from the manufacturer or you know, in a pack. I normally buy it in like a pack of 24 pounds. But before I make a large sculpture like I'm going to today, I have to roll it all out, and I add the conditioner to make sure the clay is workable and it won't crack. Because if I don't add the conditioner when I'm bending the clay, it tends to crack. And the softener allows it to bend really well without any damage. It just makes it a lot easier when you're making a large sculpture. So this can take several hours depending on how much clay I need. So this is about 2 pounds all rolled out. So once I've done all that, it just makes it easier for me to work with. Then I use just regular foil, just the regular heavy duty foil, and start making it into the shape that the sculpture is going to be. And the reason for the foil is the clay can't be more than about an inch and a half thick. When you bake it, it will crack, and the inside won't get baked like the outside will. It won't bake evenly. So you need to build an armature first whenever you're working with a large sculpture. This is supposed to be a 12-inch Mandrake, like a replica from Harry Potter, and this is a custom sculpture. And so I just kind of balled up the foil real loosely. You don't want to do it too tight because when the clay is baking, the air inside gets trapped and it begins to expand. Whenever you just ball up the foil real loosely, it allows some room for the air that's trapped inside to expand and press against the foil instead of pressing up against your clay and causing another crack. So that's just one of the problems that you can run into. So I can just loosely ball it up and make your basic shape. Then I get a small gauge wire and begin wrapping it around the foil just to kind of reinforce the structure and make sure that nothing's going to fall apart, and just kind of help it to be a little bit stronger. Then I can get into some more detail of shaping the armature a little more, add some more foil to it, and just make sure we have a really nice strong base. So I've completed my armature, and it was completely made out of foil, and I wrapped the armature really tight with a small gauge wire just to make sure that it stays put, and wrapped it tight around the arms to make sure that they're a little more sturdy. And this one doesn't have to be really sturdy because I plan just to make a mold of it and then use the mold to make more of these. So he'll probably get damaged during the mold making process, and I'll probably have to throw him away. But if you want the one that you're creating to be the one you're going to keep, you might want to use a thicker gauge wire and just try to make the armature a little more sturdy so that it doesn't crack. Once I finished completing the armature, then I used my rolled out clay and covered it in patches, a really thin layer of the clay. And this is kind of like an under layer. and I'll make sure that no wire is showing, and then I use a sculpting tool to smooth it all out. And a lot of my sculptures I'll put in a jar, like a specimen type sculpture, and so I want to make sure it's sealed really well so that the water can't get in. And I also usually put some fishing weights inside the armature so that if it's going to be in water it won't flip. However, this one is not planning to be in the water. He's going to be in a terracotta pot, and I have legs on him so that you can take him out. And this picture on my computer is what my customer wants him to look like. So I'm just kind of modeling him after the picture. So once I completely cover him in the clay and smooth out all the edges, then I'll start with my final layer, which then that's where I add the details and all the wrinkles. So once I'll go ahead and finish this, and then I'll come back and show you how to do the final layer. Alright, so this is a difficult part. I've already begun laying the second layer of clay onto it, and this layer I do quite a bit thicker. As you can see how thick it is, maybe an eighth of an inch, I would think. And so I just kind of form it into whatever shape I need. And then just lay it where I need it on the sculpture. And then I use my tools just to blend all the clay in. And this is the part that takes me the most time. This can take anywhere from 5, 10, or more hours. So I'm just kind of showing how it's progressing, and I'll continue to work on it. And then I'll show, in a few hours, I'll show how far I've progressed. Okay, so a few hours later, after doing a lot of sculpting, this is how he looks. This is just really rough layering of the clay, and I try not to make it any more than about an eighth of an inch thick because I don't want it to crack. So I've put a lot of details into the face, and I'm going to have to go back and smooth my tool marks just to make him look realistic, and add wrinkles. And I haven't worked on any of this yet, and I haven't worked on the hands yet, but I've just been focusing on the face. And so this is what I've got so far, and I just wanted to show how it looks after a couple hours of sculpting, and I'll get back to you in a minute so you can see. Alright, so I've spent about another 5 hours sculpting the Mandrake. Made him real wrinkly. And then I also baked him so he's finished and hard. And now we're going to make a mold. The polymer clay can crack, and so I wanted to be able to have a sculpture that's really durable, and if you drop it, it wouldn't break. So I've got a box that is an appropriate size for him, and I've also sprayed him and the box with ease release, and this is so that the silicone won't stick to the box and it won't stick to the sculpture. And for making my silicone molds, I use Smooth On Moldstar 20T, and I chose this for my molding product because I think it's a real low viscosity, so it doesn't get a lot of air bubbles trapped in it. And so I'm going to mix the silicone. It comes in 2 crates, and you mix them 50-50, and then you just pour. It's really simple. Let me mix it, and then I'll come back. So I've mixed my first bucket. I'm probably going to need several for the bottom layer. I'm not doing this mold in the typical correct way that you're supposed to make a mold. You're normally supposed to block off the bottom layer, where the bottom layer of the mold is going to be, and then pour the top. But that actually makes a really big mess, and it takes a long time to prepare the mold for it. And so I'm going to do a little cheat, that way I can save some time. The only problem is when you do this, you run the risk of making a mistake or your mold not fitting correctly together, which causes you to have more sanding to do on your plastic model once you cast your mold. So I have it all mixed together, and you start pouring in the corner. And I believe that you start in the corner because it'll just kind of naturally make its way around the sculpture and prevent air bubbles. So it comes from the bottom up. I'm going to mix several more buckets. I just don't have a bucket big enough to mix it all at once. I'm going to mix the next layer, and I'll keep pouring until I get it about halfway, and halfway up the side of my sculpture. So now I'm going to pour the last bit of silicone onto the mold. I had to do 3 bucketfuls. And I'm holding him in place so he doesn't move, because the silicone is so thick it can push him around, and then the mold won't, it probably wouldn't look right. Alright, so it's covered him halfway. And then I'm going to put some keys that I've made. These are the little mold keys. I'm just going to place them around in there so that I can join the top and bottom layer, and they'll match up well because the keys will fit together. Now that the silicone has begun to dry, it's real sticky. And so, in order for the mold, the top and the bottom, to fit together correctly, you need a key to match up to make sure that everything fits properly together. So I've made these little hex screw key type things with some kind of clay that's good for making silicone molds. I'm just going to set them on the top. Looks like it's already really firm right here. And that should be good. That'll just help the top and bottom mold to fit together better, so that I won't have very much of a line where on the cast where the top and bottom mold meet. And we'll let that dry, and then I'll show you how to make the top. Now the silicone has dried, and I can start removing my key pieces. And see, they've left a little hole where the hex screw was, or the hex key thingy was, and take all of them out. And that's where the upper layer of the mold will fit together. Okay, and then if any silicone has spilled on my guy, just peel it off and I'll have to get a box cutter and remove all these pieces, just to get them all prepared for the next layer of the mold. So I'll continue peeling it and come back whenever I'm ready. So now we're ready for the upper layer of the mold. I've removed any silicone that may have spilled on my Mandrake and cut out any little flappy pieces around the edge. And now the most important step that you can't forget, because if you do it'll ruin the whole thing, is to spray the model release, or the mold release. And I'm using Ease Release 200. I buy all my mold making materials from Smooth online. Give it a good spray, and I even get a paintbrush and get in the crevices. I have allowed the mold release to set for about 5 minutes, and the next step is mixing up your next batch of silicone. And again, I will start to pour it from the corner, just kind of slow and steady, and allow it to fill and seep through all the parts of the mold. And you continue to pour silicone until the mold is completely covered and there's a good amount of silicone so that the mold, you don't want your mold to be wimpy or have pieces that will leak through. So you want to make sure there's a good barrier between the edge of the mold and your sculpture. So I'll continue to do this and then let you see when I'm finished. So I have skipped a few steps because I just don't want this video to go on forever. But I finished the mold and then I prepared it for casting. So basically the mold has two pieces, and the casting materials I use comes in two packages. This is called Smooth Cast 300, and it's just a lightweight plastic, and you mix it 50-50. I just use my measuring cup and then I mix it. And this mold, at the top of the mold, I made the pouring hole. It's only a few inches big, and then I pour it, and then it starts to cure in about 10 minutes, and it gets pretty hot. And then I actually waited at least 30 minutes before I'm ready to remove the cast. Here's my original, and you can see he got cracked and damaged because polymer clay is pretty fragile, and which is the main reason why I made the mold. So now I'm ready to remove the copy from the mold. And he's going to be a lot more durable. And it's going to be pretty difficult to get him out. I want to peel him carefully so I don't damage my mold. And actually I'm going to need to cut. Oh. So let me get some pliers and then I'll show you how he looked once I pull him out. So now I've removed him from the mold. And you can see the original in the copy. He's really heavy. And so you can tell he's going to need a lot of sanding. So I'll start by peeling off all the excess plastic. Then I will get my Dremel tool and start sanding any of the lines that you see from the mold. I'll sand them down so they look just smooth, just as smooth as the edge. And then I'll also use my Dremel tool to remove this little button here that's left over from the pouring. And after that, we'll start, I'll do the primer and then I'll begin the painting. I'm nearing the completion of the Mandrake. I've already completed sanding down all the lines that you could see from the casting process that leaves lines where the two parts of the mold meet. It took me about 20 minutes with my Dremel tool to sand down all the way around him so that you can't notice that he was from a mold. And then I've begun the painting process. I started out with the undercoat of peach, and then once that dries, I'm going to put some brown, paint like a light brown over it and get in all the creases just to add some depth to him. And the mandrakes from Harry Potter have red eyes, and this one having an open mouth, I'll paint his tongue red. And once I've completed that, I'll put a protective overcoat, just like a clear coat, probably in a matte finish, and then we'll add some of the embellishments like his leaves and the little vines that come off his hands and feet. So the paint is almost finished. I'm using two different kinds of brown with the peach base. And I coat most of it with a little bit of the dark, and then I go down in the shadow areas and add some more of the dark brown. And then, kind of as a highlight, I can add a little bit more of the lighter brown. And I use just a paper towel to kind of smudge it around and give him some dimension. And once you get him the way you want him, then just let it dry, and then you can add some red. So once the brown dries, I've added some red paint, and I'm using acrylics, and I've mixed it with brown just to make it more of a natural color. And I can begin to do like a kind of a watered down coat on the inside of the mouth. And then I'll also paint the eyes. Painting is now complete, and I have put his matte finish outer coat. It's a protective coat for the paint. And now I've begun to glue on these little pieces of rope. And these are going to be his roots. I have them on the hands and feet. And I'll just kind of wait for them to dry. And then once they've dried, then the next step is adding the leaves, which I just take some artificial leaves and I cut them into the shape that I want and cut them off the artificial plant. and then I'll begin gluing them. So once all the roots are dry, then the next step is adding the artificial leaves. And I've just taken these off of an artificial plant that I bought, and I cut the leaves to the shape that I wanted them to be. And these are quite larger than the normal leaves I will use for some of my other mandrakes, but this is quite a large mandrake, so it needs to be about the size of his body. So I'll have to cut the stem off, most of it anyways, and I'm using a high strength adhesive, and this is kind of a silicone based adhesive, which will it'll have a little bit of a give, but it'll be a really strong adhesive, and it takes about 24 hours to completely dry. And then once the leaves are complete, he'll basically be done, and I'll give you a shot of him finished. My Harry Potter inspired mandrake is now complete. All I did was add a couple of protective clear coats to protect the paint and prevent scuffs. And then I added some little ropes for his roots. And then I have a hand-painted age tag that I wrote on, and then have my signature on the back. And then added a few artificial leaves, and I used a really heavy-duty silicone glue that will help them stand the test of time. And then I finish him off by putting him in a terracotta pot that I've hand-painted with just some brown paint to make it look a little aged and dirty. And there you have it. My Harry Potter inspired mandrake, and hopefully this video has been helpful, and maybe you can try to make one of your own if it wasn't just entertaining to watch. Thank you very much.